Well, if you want my ring yourself, say so, cried Bilbo, but you won't get it. I won't give my precious away, I tell you. His hand strayed to the hilt of his small sword. Gandalf's eyes flashed. It will be my turn to get angry soon, he said. If you say that again, I shall. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked. He took a step towards the hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall and menacing. His shadow filled the little room. All was still in that room of Bag End, on that fair September day of 3001 of the Third Age of the world. I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you, Gandalf said to his friend, who of old aided in the retaking of Erebor from the dragon Smaug. Gandalf had known of Bilbo's magic ring for some time, but had only begun to wonder about its nefarious powers and history more recently. My friend, you have had that ring for long enough. Let it go. I shall look after it, for I fear the power and danger of this ring is greater than you or I know. In saying this, Gandalf's own ring, Narya, gave some of its power to Bilbo, some of its strength of courage and warding off of despair. For indeed, Gandalf was trying to help his friend. Bilbo, still wondering if Gandalf wanted the ring for himself, in the depths of his heart, wanted also to give up this burden that had weighed on him since his adventure 60 years before. Bilbo took the envelope with the ring in it, and attempted to place it on the mantel above the fireplace, but his hand jerked back, and it fell upon the floor. Gandalf then stooped and picked it up, and anger came to the old hobbit, but it passed just as quickly. Goodbye for the present, Bilbo, said Gandalf, and the two bade their farewells, and the hobbit was off, back on the road for more adventure. Gandalf's smile faded as he watched the hobbit go off into the quiet Shire night, but he looked back at the envelope in his hand. He thought he could almost hear the ring call by his true name.
Aloran.
Gandalf went to the fireside and took the ring out of the envelope, and he pondered it for some time. He did wonder, could this be the lost ring of Sauron, Isildur's bane? If it was, would it not bring the greatest danger to the Shire, to the hobbits whom Gandalf loved so much? Gandalf's pity, strengthened in him by Nienna of the Valley Air, was great then, for it was unfair, he thought, that this burden should also go to Frodo, Bilbo's heir, and he would have to carry it. No, my heart tells me that this is a matter for the wise. I will bear this burden, until the council can decide what should be done. Gandalf spoke this to himself, in the darkness of the night beside the fire. The next morning, he bade farewell to Frodo and the other hobbits, telling Frodo that he had matters to attend to concerning Bilbo's ring, if Frodo gave him permission to take it, which of course the hobbit did, having always trusted the wizard all of his life. Gandalf rode with haste to Rivendell, the ring in one of his bags. He would not draw it forth until all of the wise were gathered, for even then, doubt and fear about its safekeeping began to gnaw at his heart, especially concerning Saruman. For many decades, Gandalf had wondered at Saruman's intent. Did the White Wizard seek the One Ring for himself? And so it was that, in the fall of that year, Gandalf came to the last homely house east of the sea, and Lord Elrond called together a great White Council. Galadriel and Celeborn came from Lorien, Saruman from Isengard, Círdan from the sea, Glorfindel and others from Rivendell among the wise as well. When the meeting began, the head of the White Council and the Order of the Istari started off. Many are the minor essays in the craft of ring lore, Gandalf the Grey. I do hope you have not gathered us here for nothing, and that your guess that this ring may be Isildur's bane is not unfounded, rather than in your incomprehensible love for the halflings. Gandalf shook his head, and placed on a table of carven stone the golden ring, though his hand could only take leave of it through great effort of will. Gandalf began his tale of what Bilbo had told him of this thing, how the hobbit had taken it from Gollum and where he did, how he had used it during the quest of Erebor, and so forth. For indeed Bilbo had aged little because of this ring, but his anger and greed over the ring had grown fierce to behold. Gandalf spoke of the ranger he and Elrond knew too well, Strider, and how he had sent word to Strider to pursue the creature Gollum, so that they might learn much from him. When he was finished, Gandalf sat back down in his seat. The White Council was silent. Before long, Glorfindel asked, Mithrandir, have you put the ring on yet, and discovered for yourself its effects? Surely, those here who bear the 3 elven rings would know if one of your power wore the ruling ring. If it is indeed a ring of minor lore, it would mean nothing. However, there's also great risk involved if it is, so I would caution against such an action. At this, Saruman had a dark expression. In the White Wizard's mind, he guessed too that this was the One Ring, but out of jealousy of Gandalf, he feared that the Grey Fool would seek to claim it. I am the head of this order. It should be me to test this ring. Galadriel quickly interjected. No, Saruman, this does not belong to you, and it is not your burden to bear. Gandalf, of any of us, has the power to restrain himself from indulging its power, and must be the one to put it on, if the council decides it is wise. Galadriel struggled to say this, for her Noldoran ambitions made her desire the ring as well, if it was the one. The fury on Saruman's face was not so well hidden, but he knew then if he tried to get the ring, he would have to fight the entire White Council to get it. As for Elrond and Círdan, they remembered back to the War of the Last Alliance, and they did believe it was the One Ring. But they did not know for certain, for the markings upon it, which they had seen when Isildur picked it up, had faded. The wise discussed what options they had, such as sending the ring into the west, or the ocean, or giving it to Tom Bombadil. But just as the Council of Elrond discussed in the original timeline, such alternatives would only delay the inevitable, or put them in a situation worse than what they were in. The immortal beings they were would have to deal with the One Ring someday. No, it was decided then that Gandalf should attempt the ring, and within a moment they would know if it was the One Ring indeed. Then he would take it off, and they would take more counsel to decide a future course of action, and to try to figure out how to destroy it. And so it was that Gandalf the Grey, there in Imladris, took Bilbo's ring and placed it on his finger, and the world was changed. Good counsel now became an active and powerful force. Sauron in Barad-dûr was instantly aware that a challenger, Gandalf, Mithrandir Aloran, was wearing his ring, and that now Sauron might not know victory, but his ring would. Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf himself, the three bearers of the Elven Rings, then knew the might of Sauron's spirit, channeled through the wizard who was of the same race as Sauron. And so they were ensnared. From atop Mount Taniquetil in the west, Manwë and Varda saw a new cloud of darkness fall upon Middle-earth, as their servant had failed in his task. Within Gandalf, a great power had awoken, but yet he still wore Narya, and was himself a kind and gentle spirit. Gandalf saw a vision of the lands of Middle-earth, where people were compassionate and took pity on one another, by threat of force. The Dark Tower would be thrown down, and Mordor would be cleansed, and Gandalf would oversee Middle-earth, and order all its folk to his liking, for he was more powerful than any that walked the earth. But he was not alone, for Galadriel and Elrond, the bearers of the two other rings, were also now under his sway, and were inspired by Gandalf, for the inspirational and courageous powers of the Ring of Fire, Narya, were only enhanced by the ruling ring, for they knew it to be that. Gandalf looked fair to them, no longer old and grey, but young and full of heavenly light, a king of the Vanyar, the highest of elves, and akin to Eonwë, the herald of Manwë, did he seem to Galadriel and Elrond. But to Círdan, who was the furthest seeing of all elves, saw the image of evil that Gandalf would truly become. Saruman was frightened that Gandalf had taken the ring for himself, and he would attempt to leave the meeting, but Gandalf commanded him to sit with the power of his voice, reinforced with his new possession.
Saruman, I did not say you could go.
Gandalf's voice was powerful to behold, and those of weak will might have fallen into despair to hear it.
My friends, this is the One Ring indeed, and it is ours. We shall take the fight to Sauron now, just as we did when he hid in Dol Guldur all those years ago. But this time we shall destroy him utterly, and rip out the dreadful foundation of Barad-dûr, so he may not ever return. Let us prepare our forces, and I shall ride to Erebor in the north and Gondor in the south to ensure the armies of our allies. Saruman, you shall rally the men of Rohan under the banner of Isengard. Elrond, Glorfindel, and Círdan, gather the Dúnedain Rangers and all your folk from here to Lindon. Galadriel and Celeborn, gather the Galathrim and the elves of Mirkwood. In 1 year's time, our great army shall sunder the black gates of Mordor and throw down the Dark Tower.
Indeed, it was pointless to resist the will of Gandalf the Ring Lord, for the power of the One Ring and Narya, as well as now the forthright power that he revealed of his Maiar kind, was great. Saruman's spirit of resistance broke, and even he submitted to the will and power of Gandalf. Círdan would attempt to remind Gandalf of his true purpose, saying that he was only meant to advise the Free Peoples, But Gandalf could not accept that. He believed Sauron could only be defeated through force, like Melkor being defeated in the War of Wrath in the Elder Days. And so it was that a year went by, and in 3002 of the Third Age, the host of the West was assembled outside of Mordor. Indeed, this was years before Sauron would have been ready to make war, and he knew that he would not have a chance of victory, not in this way. Even the Nazgul had been dominated by Gandalf and his command over the One, and they were released by his mercy and allowed to accept the gift of Iluvatar and die therefore. So, even as Gandalf led the armies in the name of the Valar, Sauron's forces threw open his own gates, and Sauron himself, in the weak physical embodiment he had, came forth and surrendered before the mighty wizard. Gandalf was wary of this, but indeed, he still had pity, for that was always a core element of Gandalf's being, something that drove him. He had pity for Maiar, who of old he knew in the early days of the world. Sauron was thus taken into custody, and Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf together threw down the dark tower of Barad-dûr, and green would come there once more. Gandalf thus ordered the world to his liking, and his compassion made the world seem fair, but the ring of Sauron, and Sauron himself, made it feel foul. Aragorn was made the king of Gondor and Arnor. Gollum was left in the wild. Gandalf, just as it always was with him, never made a permanent abode, but he wandered the lands, ordering things to his will. Sauron was at first held as a prisoner in Lorien, but Gandalf and the One Ring would come to him from time to time, and ever Sauron's counsels were in the ears of Gandalf. Before long, Gandalf and his advisor Sauron would wander the world together, and the shadow fell upon Middle-earth, one that it could never escape. Gandalf, nor the elves under his tyranny, would ever go west, and his policies became stricter and more tyrannical as time went on. Lands would be conquered in his name and rule. Men who arose against him to be free would be put down, and the fire would spread. Even Aragorn, King Elessar of Gondor and Arnor, and Theoden, King of Rohan, would attempt to slay Gandalf with their armies in the wild, but they would be put to the flaming sword, and they would be shown the true power of Gandalf the Maiar, and the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf's compassion and pity would be lessened and lost over the years, and though Sauron had lost, he had won. For just as he corrupted Númenor and its men, he corrupted Middle-earth and all its folk, and before long Gandalf's hatred was turned to the Lords of the West, those who had told Gandalf in the beginning to restrain his power before he went to Middle-earth. The influence of Gandalf and the One Ring could be seen in all lands, the Shire not the least, and the fires that spread there made Gandalf realize, if only slightly, the terrible things he had done. In wanting to save Frodo and the other hobbits from this burden, he doomed them to thraldom and fire. Círdan and any who yet opposed the will of Gandalf left the shores of Middle-earth, bringing word to the Valar in the west of the happenings in the east. So it was the Valar knew Middle-earth was lost, and in trying to defeat Sauron, they had sent another Dark Lord to take his place. For though the Ring of Sauron ever wanted to return to its master, it was its master's will to bring tyranny to Middle-earth through Gandalf, until such a time as he would be defeated and Sauron could arise anew. As it was in the War of Wrath, the only thing that could defeat Gandalf at that time was the direct intervention of the West, or, as it was with Númenor, the direct intervention of Eru Ilúvatar. And so we come to the end of our theory about what if Gandalf had taken the One Ring. From this theory of what if Gandalf had taken the One Ring, we see that sometimes advice and good counsel are more powerful and good in the long term than force or outright action. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. I hope you all enjoyed this theory remake. It is one that I've wanted to remake for some years, and I am glad to have finally done it as an extra video for you all, since I've had some spare time on my hands. I believe this updated telling is far more true to what would have happened than what I made before, and I am more confident to have published this one. But let me know your thoughts. Would it have happened like this, or some other way? Let me know in the comments below. This theory is particularly sad because Gandalf is one of the most good and moralistic characters in all of the Legendarium, particularly because he doesn't force his will upon anyone. He only offers good advice and wisdom, and inspiration to help others. But nevertheless, I hope you all enjoyed this theory. It was fun to make. To further support the channel, please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon for a podcast and Discord server. All of those links are in the description below. Ryan and I just did a podcast on how the timeline of Middle-earth matches up in the Lord of the Rings Online, and we discussed many other topics and recent news as well, so please check that out if you're interested on our Patreon. I want to shout out our Valar tier patrons: Adrian De la Torre, Chris Ortner, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Tobias Goldner, Ryan Ramsey, Adam Rank, Merton, John Hume, Tom Bombadil, Reggie93, Chip Slade, and Jennifer Wood. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all of my patrons. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I will see you all again Sunday with that video on the sorrowful kinslayings of the First Age. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining me on this extra adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.